Y'all, welcome back to Kentucky Fried Wargaming. We're two guys who aren't qualified to talk about anything, decided to talk about a game with hard math and chance. I'm Joe.
And I'm John.
And today we're starting a new mini-series that we're going to be doing on the channel. This is a John idea, but it is one that we have talked about before, and we just decided we're going to pull the trigger and do it. And that is, not necessarily faction focuses, because we aren't those people that are going to look at every unit bit by bit and give you the dynamic assessments of how good or bad they are in a competitive meta or anything like that. But more of a faction identity guide, where for Conquest, the Last Argument of Kings, a game that if you've been watching the channel, we've played a lot of over the past 6 months, and now have a lot of games under our belt. I feel like we've started to have a pretty good grasp on the game itself, the core fundamentals of a lot of the factions, and now we thought it would be helpful to put together a guide for each of these to kind of talk about what the flavor of each faction is. What are the base core rules, the army rules of each faction? What are some of their supremacy abilities, and what kind of style do they seem to lean towards? Maybe a couple we think are cool, and then walk you through what we think is appealing about them, give up some ratings, and then talk about, what are some of their challenges, so you could figure out maybe, if you're debating on getting into Conquest, if that faction is for you, or maybe not.
Or if you already play, and maybe this is a faction you play, but you're struggling to figure out what you're missing, per se, we might be able to help you find that. We're not going to say that we're going to solve that for you, because that's really presumptuous. But this is not just for new players. This is sort of like you're already into the game doing things. This isn't like a guide for a new player. We may be working on that in the future, of how to get started immediately as a new player.
Yeah, one of the things I have seen specifically, and why we're starting with Nords, is when we did our sort of Conquest intro video, which if you are a new player, I recommend you go watch. One of the things we talked about was the Nords, and how I've been playing Nords, and I had some challenges, and then I figured some stuff out, and it started to go better for me. And someone in the comments asked, what was that thing you did? Because I guess they were struggling also, and it's something I see often in the Nords Discord. So, in short, that's why we decided to do this one first, because obviously there's people out there who are trying to learn how this faction works, and it's just not quite clicking, and they don't know why. Well, maybe we can help and give you something. So if we're going to do sort of like a faction identity breakdown, I feel like we got to start with the core rules, right? That's the bread and butter that you're going to bring to every single game of Conquest that you're going to play with the army. So
it sort of informs the rest of your choices of what units and unit styles you're going to use. If you have movement-based buffs, you're not going to bring movement 3 models. I'm not saying those exist, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. And for Nords, you have 3 faction abilities currently, as of recording in early June of 2024. This could change, but currently, you got 3 of them. The first is Ice, Flesh and Blood. Medium and heavy regiments can charge through hindering terrain while still getting to be inspired. Note, though, this is a key one, this is tricky. This does not mean you get to keep impact attacks. So stuff on giants, if they charge through terrain, they charge through hindering, they're going to get to be inspired when they land that charge. That's a good buff. However, they're still going to lose their impacts. That's a small one. I've seen people do it wrong often. Calling it out. Secondarily for the rule, you can avoid the -1 to hit debuff while you're standing in water that other factions have to take. And then thirdly, you half damage that you take from terrain damage, from dangerous terrain, for example. So you can be a little more risky on terrain, and you're not going to get punished as hard. Generally speaking, I like this rule. And it, for me, has been sort of a big factor in some of my games. And it has helped me out quite a bit when I can use it casually. But I think what makes it hard to kind of speak about it unanimously is that this is all based on terrain buffs.
Yeah, if you're playing on tables with no terrain on them, or very little terrain, or terrain that's inconsequential to where the objectives are, this sort of becomes a non-rule. This becomes less impactful. Parabellum themselves have suggested that you use 6 to 8 pieces of terrain on a piece of table, and that you make them impactful. Likely because this rule, and also because that makes games more fun and dynamic. So, like, if you're finding that this rule just does not come up to you for you at all, maybe talk about it with your group. Maybe talk about it, like, try to ask TO if you're going to tournaments, like, why is the terrain like this? There is going to be coming some terrain suggested, like, maps for Conquest in the future from Parabellum, and that will hopefully help this issue. But until then, we're all flying by the seat of our pants when making boards.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of pictures of people's games, some from like big tournaments, some from just shop games, and some of them, it seems like people's goal is they don't want to deal with terrain, so they will put down their 6 minimum, and then they will put them as far away from everywhere the action is as humanly possible. So it's sort of like a non-factor in games. If you are on those boards, this rule does next to nothing for you. It's not going to come up. That's just a fact. It is what it is. But I don't think that's Parabellum's intention. So, have some discussions with your folks if that's a thing. Because on a good heavy table of terrain, this can help you get that edge in fights that otherwise you might be losing.
Yeah, it really helps with trading, like making a proper trade, which we'll get into more later. But there's a lot of trading going on here.
So that rule, I like it. But be prepared that it could be a little feast or famine for you. The next, Blood of the Einherjar. While an infantry or brute regiment is wounded, they get +1 attack. No monsters or characters may get this buff. That's a good note to call out. Both are excluded. Secondarily, if your character kills an enemy in a duel, the regiment that enemy character was attached to becomes broken. This rule, I'm gonna be honest, it sounds a little harsh, but it rarely does anything for me. I'm not saying +1 attack when you're hurt is bad. I mean, it's a bonus. It's just that rarely does that bonus matter a whole lot in my 30-ish games of Nords.
And you can also not plan around this. Like, how do you build a game plan around purposefully losing models to get more damage? Like, it's a purely bonus. We are like, I need Hail Mary help sort of like rule. That, like, I understand the flavor they're going for here, but I'm just not sure if it hits the way that you want it to. And the stipulations of having to jump through the hoops of it only being infantry and brutes also can kind of suck. And it is the duel part is essentially useless because duels, at least in our experience, almost never occur. And when they do, the objective of the duel is not to kill a character. The objective of the duel is to try to get them to not have an objective.
Yeah, you're there, so essentially I could break you, basically.
Yeah.
Or most of the time your duels are just going to be declined. So this is one that I find... I'm not going to say +1 attack is bad. It's a bonus. It's just that normally when you get hit with Nords, you're either fully killed or you're down to like 1 stand alive because you have no beef. And when that happens, let's say I have 5 attacks base on that stand or 4 attacks base on that stand. Okay, on my remaining single stand, I'm now at 5 attacks. Okay, it's not going to save me. It's not going to shift the needle. It might let me get another model from the enemy unit if I roll well, but that's not going to do the job most of the time. And duel could become more impactful. The note is that we are recording this without looking into the future, and we know that they currently are not happy where the duel system is, but I don't know how that's going to change in the future. So take that one with a grain of salt if you're listening to this far in future land, where maybe now the duels are better, but currently... I would not count on this rule for much of anything. Third, though, makes up for my thoughts on the second. Prophecy unfulfilled. While an enemy regiment is currently engaged with a friendly regiment, non-monster Nords get +2 inches to their charge distances to get into that combat. I ain't gonna beat around the bush. This rule slaps. This rule absolutely slaps. You're... Essentially, the way it works is if you see an allied Nords unit get tied up and they're getting jumped in that Denny's parking lot, what up? I'm here. I'm coming in from the side, and I'm going to hit you hard. So hard. Which is incredibly necessary for Nords units. Because I'm going to be honest, spoiler, most Nords units straight up lose 1-to-1 traits. You're just going to get your ass kicked. However, if you could give +2 inches to a buddy's charge behind you, you get an allied unit into the flank. Now you're ganging up on an enemy unit that might be a little tougher. Now you're getting into the flank, you're getting them to reroll successes. It changes the way the board feels. And it's really good.
Yeah, like a lot of what you're trying to do in Nords is like find key points that you can target and reliably kill. And by like this allows you to more reliably get there with as many models as you need to. Because nothing sucks more than, okay, I'm going to throw this unit in there and I'm going to do some stuff, but I need another unit to finish it off. And then that unit failing a charge is terrible. And as a Wizard player, that happens to me sometimes, and I wish I had this rule, but instead I've got chance.
Yeah, this one is really, really good. It's one you can rely on. It doesn't seem all of that impactful when you're first learning the game. Play it on the table. I think you will find that it really changes the amount of pressure you can apply to your opponents. And this rule has certainly changed the flow of my games. I have
Especially if you can
really
combine a couple of these, like Prophecy Unfulfilled and Ice, Flesh, and Blood, like +2 to charge, and you can charge through, like, say, forests and not lose Inspired. So now, like, your opponent might not necessarily expect you to be able to do that, but a lot of opponents are used to being able to use forest to sort of, like, at least lessen the blow of a side charge, and then instead you're just eating it full bore. Like that.
I don't care at all. What up? I'm here.
That's pretty good.
Together they do really, really well. The second rule, underwhelming, but at least you got two other ones that can really push your games in a cool direction. Next, as we were thinking about how to like parse a faction identity, I think the thing we come to very quickly is that much of faction identity revolves around, in Conquest at least, the selection of your general, because of how impactful supremacy abilities often are in various factions across the game. In a lot of ways, they set the secondary tone of a faction. And in my opinion, they are second only to the core faction rules in making the flavor work.
Yeah.
And here, I think that is very representative for the Nords. Generally speaking, you find that a lot of the Nord supremacy abilities focus around moving up the board or pressuring the board in different ways quite aggressively. And there's little to no damage buff or anything of that nature. It's a lot about trying to move faster, to pressure harder, to get there quicker, so that you can get an early lead and kind of get your army rolling.
Yeah, it's like building momentum and pressure to then make proper trades and then take that early lead and leverage it later in the game where you're less powerful compared to other factions.
Yeah, Nords are a very top-heavy faction. You're going to apply an immense amount of suffocating pressure early, but as the game goes on, you are going to get worse and worse and worse. And this is the way you try to win, is by pressuring the board very, very early, getting ahead, using your supremacy abilities, and then knowing you're going to get your butt kicked later on. But if you got enough points early, so be it, you still win. I think the one most representative of this is Shaman. And
Yes.
Oh, wow, it is quite the buff. If Shaman is your warlord, 2 non-monster regiments every turn can be given Vanguard. So 2 units that are going to come on the board, you select them, boom, an extra free move when they come on.
Yeah, it just it doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're anyone who's played Imperial Officer in 100 Kingdoms or, played with anything that can triple move, it's a lot. It's a lot. Like, I mean, the say a 6-inch move unit, moving 18 inches up the board is looking on, like, maybe even getting onto, like, objective territory. It's like positioning herself early, especially if you're getting on there like turn 1, shooting up the board, doing a bunch of stuff. Like, it is hard to express how warping this is to your list, but it does just let you bring so much pressure early into where you are dominating the board, and now your opponent has to react to you instead of you reacting to your opponent in the first couple of turns, which lets you gain that early lead that we're saying that you need. Like, you don't take punches well, but you can deliver them fairly well. And that's where this is. Now, how the punch lands is really determinative on like what unit it is, but you can get there with this rule, and I think you can also use the next rule that we're going to talk about to also get there, but in a different way. And that's the Blooded and the Vargear Lord. One of the only like supremacy abilities that is shared by two characters.
Weird. Very weird.
Yeah. It's called Call to the Hunt, which is essentially pick 2 regiments to arrive from reinforcements instead of 1. It is like better, it's like a lateral upgrade flank, right? So flank allows you to pick if a unit is going to come into reinforcements or not without having to tap into that free one, right? Here, you just get to pick 2 free ones. So you can delay if you want to. Oftentimes with Nords, it doesn't seem like that's the choice, but it is an option. Instead, it is like you can pick 2 units to come in. Okay, well, I want my Huskarls to come in on turn 2, for sure. And I want my
Ogres.
Trolls, my Ogres also come in turn 2. Like, they got to be conjoined because I want to take advantage of that +2 charge. I want to take advantage of being able to, like, the terrain and get on tables early. Like, it sort of all cascades together into, like, okay, I can now reliably expect to get 2 units a turn, regardless of what I roll for my reinforcements.
Yeah.
It's taking out the probability and just giving you a thing that you know that you can plan around. So every turn, you can plan around, well, okay, what am I bringing next turn? What am I bringing next turn? And in those early turns, it allows you to take riskier moves to apply pressure easier.
It is a thing that I think a lot of people are sleeping on currently. Everyone looks at Shaman currently in Nords, and I get it. Shaman's real good. Shaman might be the best in the faction. In fact, it's probably just true. But when I started making my list, I started with Blooded for 2 reasons. One, I'm a bit of a contrarian for lists. I don't want to play the meta thing. So I wanted to try to make something else, not Shaman, work. And 2, Blooded came in my starter box. So I gotta take Blooded. And the way my list started to do well over time is that I didn't roll for anything. And I mean that literally. I never random rolled for anything to come in with my list. Turn 1, I got to pick 2 things to come on. I only had 1 light unit. Bow chosen, auto coming on. Turn 2, okay, I get to pick 2. So I'm going to pick my Ogre to come on, guaranteed, and I'm going to pick my Huskarl unit that's beefed up to come on, guaranteed. And then I have 2 units of Wolves that have flank, and then the Blooded is in a unit of Trolls. He gives the unit, he's in flank. So now I just guaranteed 5 units to come on turn 2. And then turn 3, I have an Ice Jotnar and a Mountain Jotnar. I'm going to guarantee both to come in turn 3. I don't roll for anything in the army. Everything's on the table instantaneously. We're coming up the board. We need to die on circles. That's the strategy. And at first I was like, I don't really know if this is going to do the business. So what? I get my stuff on the board quickly. Y'all, trust me when I say there's gas in that tank. There's gas. It's hard to respond to in some army lists. Sometimes by the time I get everything on the board, they failed a couple and their impactful pieces are left behind. And now I've just got so much momentum that they're behind on board state. And it's hard for them to claw their way back into that.
Yeah, and there's other supremacy abilities in Nords, but I think those are the 2 key points of how you want to play Nords. I think that's the strategy you're sort of looking for, and that consistency you're looking for from the faction. Because things like Volva are neat little like fringe plays you can do, where it's +1 evasion to a maximum of +2 evasion. It's pretty neat.
Well, to a maximum of evasion 2, not +2.
Yes. Sorry, a maximum of evasion 2. And then you have the Cunning Gear, who I'm gonna be honest, I think the Cunning Gear one is just not good.
I've tried it. I can't make it work. It don't do.
Terrifying 1 theoretically is a nice damage buff across the whole army. But especially in our meta where we have multiple Old Dominion players, that means that my supremacy play, my supremacy ability is just useless against certain matchups. And not it's suboptimal. No, it actually does nothing.
Because mechanically, they just get around all of those rules in general.
Yes. Which when you have such a core rule you're building an army around, that is not a starter. And then you have the last one, which is Jarl.
The Jarl.
Surprise attack.
Yeah.
Which I think has a lot of gas, but it is you have to plan so much around using it, and that becomes a absolutely pivotal point where you use that ability that it is not something I suggest that you do if you're trying to learn how to win with the faction, but it is definitely a fringe build you can make later.
Mm-hmm. It's very good.
And to be honest, might get better depending on whatever changes happen in the future or model releases happen in the future.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's fair. It's representative of my games, at least. I haven't tried Jarl myself because I don't have a bunch of, like, foot dudes, like a bunch of infantry regiments to make Jarl work. Because his stuff doesn't work for monsters and whatnot, and I'm a monster mash sort of guy. But I do think there's gas in that tank. And also for Volva, I have a cute list idea of Volva with, like, troll units?
Many trolls.
With many trolls. Because people say trolls are bad, and I say they're wrong. Leave my blue boys alone.
Listen, all I'm saying is that, like, Nords chat will say trolls are bad one day, and the other day they're like, trolls are fucking great. Like, you can't trust anything Nords chat says.
No.
Because at the whole time, everything is both terrible and wonderful all at the same time.
We are the most unreliable narrator. Good lord. We are not at all responsible. We cannot be trusted.
The one thing you can give Nords chat is that they're passionate. They're passionate about Nords.
That's an awful polite way to put that. And I appreciate it. Okay.
So
Army, though. Army why?
Army time. Yes.
Strategy.
Like, what does this army do? Like, what? What does it do? Okay.
Clearly, I've said it before, I'll say it again, and it's a bit of a meme. I don't mean it as a meme. I mean this seriously. The thing it does really well is it runs up the board really fast, and it dies on circles. That's how it wins. It's really good at it, actually. And that for me, that was the revelation that blew my mind and then made me realize I'm playing this army all wrong.
Yeah, like,
I'm here to try to kill people. It's not my job to actually win fights.
you're not going to necessarily run up the table and then like sucker punch them off the table and then get objectives. The first part is run up the table, get objectives, and then what trades you can make in addition to getting the objectives will support you continuing having those objectives for as long as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really ties into like one of their bigger weaknesses, which is that they have very little late game pressure. They just don't have the staying power to be there in turns 5 and 6 and 7. Like, most of their game is being played in turns 1 through 5.
Mm-hmm.
Like when things like Old Dominion start coming online, you're gonna fall apart. Which is an okay design space to be in. They're like the skirmishy shock attack force is what they're supposed to be, right? That's fine. Like, but know that going in, right?
Yeah.
Like, that you're going to struggle in the end.
Yeah, not an inherent con, just a thing you need to recognize so you don't get surprised.
Yeah, it means that you're going to have to play riskier early on. You can't play safe. You have to be aggressive.
Yeah, there are times that I've had a fair amount of things on the board late game, but it's because largely my units got sort of hurt badly trying to trade, and then I had some dregs of a unit left. You know, I have one stand of a Huskarl unit. I have maybe 2 stands of a Bochosen unit. I have a badly wounded Mountain Jotnar somewhere. Generally speaking, none of that stuff's going to be at like real beefy full health stuff, because healing and whatnot, long-term defense, like you might in some other factions, not a thing for you.
Mm-hmm.
However, it doesn't mean you can't do damage. But the key for Nords is that, as we mentioned earlier, you're not really going to win straight-up fights very often. If you try to one-up, sort of square up 3-stand on 3-stand, most of the time, you're going to lose those matchups.
Yeah, it's really determinative on charge. Like, if Ugar's going to charge in on men-at-arms, yeah, they're going to wreck them.
But Huskarls into John's Chosen of Conquest? No. I'm going to bounce. I'm a bounce. Anything that has any teeth, you're going to bounce. If you're charging just straight up, front to front, a unit from city-states that's got their buffs for their defense, their phalanx, you're going to bounce. You're really not made for that sort of trading. Your dudes looked yoked and muscular, like they're ready for that. They are not ready for that. Instead, you want to gang up on enemy units to then sneak damage through by dogpiling 1 or 2 units. because you're never going to take an honest trade, generally speaking, in my experience. So, like John mentioned earlier, oftentimes I will throw something in that's going to pin a unit, and it will take up the front rank, and it'll fight them a little. I might get a couple of wounds, but I know I'm not going to kill them. But
Yeah, things like trolls, huskarls.
they're going to get in there. They'll tie them up. But I'm not going to do the business. However, then Prophecy Unfulfilled kicks in. And now another unit on the flank, maybe a unit of Direwolves, maybe a unit of Ogre, get a bonus to charge. And they're pretty fast base. And so now there's quite a good chance I'm going to be able to make a charge into the flank of whatever unit I want to kill. And now 2-on-1, we're dogpiling them, we're getting in the flanks, we're getting the debuffs for their leadership, for being in the flank. There's quite a bit of terrifying across the faction, and the giants and the direwolves, stuff like that. Now I'm even more making your flank pain hurt. And instead of taking that one-on-one honest fight, now it's 2-on-1, and we're just going to bowl you over. That's how you win a lot of your trades, to sneak through that damage that, if you look at the scrolls by themselves, might look a little underwhelming. It's those faction rules popping back up.
Yeah, and so, like, this all sort of accumulates into, like, the two big key points for them, right? And then we're going to go into what they're, like, bad at, right? They are a high skill floor army. This is not an army that you are going to pick up and you're going to know what you're doing in the first five games. Like, this is probably, of the armies in the game, surprisingly, one of the ones that is the harder ones to learn. We'll get into those reasons later, but just from the get-go, understand that for the rest of this video. On top of that, they are a pressure army. So being both a high skill floor and a pressure army is a weird combination, right? Because you can't just push forward, do damage. You have to push forward strategically and make trades where you can. Trading is the most important part of playing Nords. If you're going to throw away a 170 point or 200 point unit, you need to be making more than 170 points or 200 points worth of stuff. If that's killing another 200 point unit with a 200 point unit, but also getting points on an objective, awesome. That's a good trade. But if you are just throwing it into a unit and dying, that's not. Sometimes the trade is, I lost the unit entirely, but your Ash and Dawn don't get to move. That's awesome. That's a great trade.
That is my answer for Ash and Dawn, is I stand just with my faces in front of the circle, so they can't technically touch the circle, and then they kill me and take 0 damage in response. However,
meanwhile,
I got the points.
Yeah, you got the points. Because there's a single stand of Huskarls behind. They're just holding it. But, like, we're going to leverage that into telling you what you struggle against. Because what are Ash and Dawn but high defense, high morale?
Ooh, they're a tough unit, and they fist fight so good.
Yeah. And that's sort of what this army struggles against. This army struggles against two major things. That is ranged and magic threats, right? So stuff that's going to, like, take the pressure off, right? So shooting you as you're trying to get up the table, that's going to suck. Magic that's in, like, hurt you while you're on objectives, or, like, slow you down, move you around, make you have to, like, play differently, that's going to suck. Like double sorcerer and Dwegum, that kind of thing. Just not very good. And then also just stuff that has high defense or late game, like, bombs, right? So, like, that can be different, right? So, like, if you get a big enough lead early on, you can still win against these armies. But, like, Dwegum and Old Dominion, just, like, if they get to late game and you didn't do enough, you're going to lose the game.
They're going to beat the absolute brakes off you.
Yes. And for different reasons. Like, Old Dominion just have a lot of stuff that makes trading hard against them. And they're, like, a pretty high defensive army, while also being pretty, like, great at endgame. And they've gotten a little bit better at mid-game. And then Dwegum, on the other hand, they're playing an honest game, so you have no way to pressure your opponent into making bad moves for the most part. Right? Like, a lot of armies have mechanics they need to play around, and where Dwegum's mechanic is really just, we have high armor, and we hit really hard, and we've got, like, pretty honest play. They move up the middle of the table, and they're going to take some time to get there. Once they're there, you're in trouble.
Yeah, and I think also what makes Dwegum difficult, and Old Dominion particularly difficult, is, like, both of them do that really well, which makes it hard for you to, like, pull them apart and get into the flanks. But secondarily, both hamper your pressure plan in a very unique way. So for Old Dominion, they ignore all of your leadership stuff. And Nords have a surprising amount of Terrifying 1 or Terrifying 2 leadership things in the army.
Which are not dead stats.
Yep, with the monsters and stuff, which normally means, especially in the flank, you get to do more damage than you would think from the leadership hurts because of the extra charge bonus to get into the flank. Against Old Dominion, all of that does nothing because they dodge all of it. So your damage, which is already not super high for Nords compared to some other factions, now it goes even lower against Old Dominion, so you trade even worse against Old Dominion, which means that it's hard to shift them a lot of the time. For Dweghom, their unique thing is that their spell power and their range damage output is really high. Depending on your build, it's super, super high. And in that case, you lose a lot of your pressure. Because normally, like against John's Woodrude, for example, if I get up on all of those objectives first, I'm going to score all the points first. I'm going to get ahead first. And John is going to bring his melee threats to come kick my butt and move me off of them. But he has to get to me in melee to do that. Might give me 1 full turn, maybe 2 full turns of getting my points before now we're skirmishing for the actual objectives. With range, though, as he moves in, he can blow me up. So even as he moves closer to close distance, he is already moving me off the points with Dweghoms. Which is a good sort of strength that Dweghom have to leverage against Nords. Tough matchup. And once they do get in close, they do outfight you almost across the board for Dweghom. For Old Dominion, a lot of the stuff doesn't necessarily outfight you, but outscores you. Until the later stuff come in, like, Bone Golems are a good example of an OD unit that once it's on, painful. And you're not going to outfight Bone Golems most of the time. You just have to score before they get there.
And like specifically with Bone Golems, if you have to hit them hard and fast before their Aura of Death can slap you back, so you have to sort of bait them out and get them. And so like it's a situation where if your opponent has played enough Old Dominion, they're going to be able to sort of like leverage that and to make it harder for you to set things up.
You have to get cagey. You have to give some sacrificial units to hold the Bone Golems back for a minute. That's how I usually answer that. It's a good use for units that almost entirely died, but just have like one stand. It buys you a little breathing room. And secondarily, depending on your matchups, 100 Kingdoms can be rough because Ash and Dawn exist. And Ash and Dawn are really, really tough right now in their current form. But as I said, I have beat Ash and Dawn lists multiple times. And my answer is, I can't kill them. And I just accept this. I have had the perfect attack roll into them. I've had like the perfect scenario. Well, I won't say attack roll. I missed like 2 hits. But I had my Ice Yoked Arm, my biggest, toughest dude in the whole faction. He got into their flank. He made the charge. He got his impacts off. He got his spell off. He 14 attacks into their side with Rend 3, with Terrifying. And I killed 1.5 horses out of a 6-horse unit. And then, with only 2 of their side dudes touching my Ice Giant, they one-shotted him from 100% to dead. After that, I accepted I just can't kill Ash and Dawn. But what I can do is stand just on the edge of the objective so that when the Ash and Dawn come to kill me, and they will, they don't get to do it while touching the objective zone. So I get to score the points, and they can't tow forward to get onto it until at least next turn, and I died on circles, so I win, which is the Nord strategy.
Yeah, sometimes the answer for like super powerful Uber units is just tie them up. Like make them have to chew through nonsense.
It took a while for me to really understand that for this faction, but it's the strategy, and it works.
That's going to lead us to our rating section, where we're going to rate it into 3 categories. And the 3 categories are going to be flavor to gameplay rating, which is like how does the lore and the way the models look and how they're sort of described to you translate to gameplay. Is this faction newcomer friendly? And if so, why? If not, why? And then lastly, how does this faction reward long-term mastery? This is not, like, regardless of what we say, this does not mean that this faction is necessarily bad or that you're bad for playing it. If you enjoy it, you should play it.
Yeah.
I think all of the factions in Conquest are playable. All of the factions in Conquest are winnable with. They're all, especially in a like casual like play at the shop or play with your buddies environment. All of them are great. If you're going to take it to tournaments, there's a certain level of like tier listing you're going to see.
Unavoidable.
But we're going to rate it with S tier being the best, with F being terrible, right? A being like pretty good. And for us, we like to root it in that really where most factions should be at is middle of the road, which is B. Not everything can be S tier, not everything can be A tier. Like B is where most things should try to get to, is the way we sort of frame this. To sort of help you understand how we're rating it.
Yeah.
And to first off, with Nords, is there going to be flavor to gameplay rating?
This is tough. It's real
We
tough.
gave it a C plus, right? We're giving it a C plus, which is not the worst. It's not the best. There's some problems here. And the biggest reason why is because there's sort of two minds when you look at Nords. And most Nords players we've talked to were people who play the game and how they express when they look at Nords what they see. On one hand, you see big monster mash where it should be bruisers, fist fighting dudes, like smashing stuff off the table. And on the other hand is scrappy raiders and Vikings sort of rushing up the table, picking and choosing their fights, getting what they need, and getting the hell out of Dodge. And like winning early.
So are you more
And
anchored in fantasy or are you more anchored in historicals?
Yes.
Tough.
And if you can see parts of where they're trying to marry those two concepts together in Nords, and they haven't quite got there. I don't think that they need to completely sacrifice the scrappy technical play. And they also don't need to completely like give the entire faction to the bruiser monster fighting. I think that there's going to be a way they can sort of meld those two better in the future. And they've gotten closer recently to that. And I think they're going to keep moving towards that direction. So really, if you're going to get into Nords, you kind of need to expect that you need to be on both of these. You need to like parts of both of this.
Yeah, which is the
You're
thing.
not going to be able to just play one.
Yeah, it's a thing I didn't know going in, that's for sure. Because like I looked at this from a lore perspective. Like I read the lore of the game because I'm a lore guy, and they described them as being genetically modified super soldiers, sort of like Captain America or like a Space Marine without the power armor. They have they're roided to the nines and they're mutating to become monstrous and strong, and they're hulking looking armored dudes. They look like they are ready to fist fight, and then they didn't, and I couldn't quite wrap my head around why these, like, what is happening? The fluff isn't matching what I'm feeling on the table. And it's then that I realized, oh, these are designed more like historicals, where we're hit and running and we're trying to run away. We're really not trying to straight up fight, rather than the monster that it is actually designed to look at as a model or in the lore in a lot of cases.
Yeah, like the army is not a wrecking ball. The army is like a scrap. Like just scrappy sort of like win how you can deal.
Yeah, I've seen this before where people don't recognize that there are the two halves, and I think you have to kind of respectfully recognize both exist, because generally I've seen it boil down to why in the chats or when new players pop in of like, why ain't I killing anything? Or, well, dumb, it's not historically accurate. Well, alright, turd. Like, explain to me the 18-foot tall dude and the werewolves. Like, where's the historical accuracy? Where did they put them on the long ships during the Danish invasion? I'm just a little curious, please. There's both. It's gotta be both. And they know that currently it isn't where they want it. They've already said they're working on it. So I'm gonna give them some grace. It's not easy to change the identity of a faction overnight. It's something you've got to do in small iterative steps, because their old rules were problematic. They couldn't stay the way they were.
Yes.
And they're trying to push them in a new direction. It's just going to take a bit of time.
And something to sort of note, and this is going to carry over to almost all of our other videos, and we're going to probably discuss it in every video, just to really make sure it's being known there, is that we play a lot of different games. And we have played for years, and for me, over a decade, these games. And so one of the things that Parabellum does that I highly appreciate, and I would suggest that if you frame their changes and how they do things in this light, it'll all feel way better and look better, is that they do incremental small changes to the game so that people's models are less impacted, like on huge swings. And so they can sort of change stuff where they need to instead of just like going super hard out the gate constantly. I think that's better for the game. And if it takes us a lot longer to get to a cooler place, but they're going to do it incrementally and like talk to the community, use the data, like really try to like test it, make sure it works, that is better. Even if it in the short term it can kind of like kind of suck, like, but that's fine. Like it's fine. You can find a way to play. None of these factions are unplayable. They just might not play that way that you're expecting. So sort of just change like the way you're looking at the army and be a little bit more accepting that it's going to take time for them to get there. And you're going to see changes. Like they're very receptive. I just want to like, this is not a crap on Parabellum because they didn't change the thing we want section. Like it takes time. Game design is hard.
God, it's so hard. Yeah, for me, the thing that makes this hard is that like when you look at these minis and the art and the lore, you don't expect I'm here to get my butt kicked on circles. Like that's not the thing you're expecting. But it is what you need to do if you want to win. And that's usually the gap that, like, in the comments, people ask, like, well, how are you winning? That was the bridge I had to build in my brain to get there.
Yeah.
And once you start looking at it that way, you will probably start to do better in some of your games.
Yeah. Which is going to lead us to our next point, which is newcomer friendly. And we're going to give this a worse rating. Promise we don't hate Nords.
I like Nords.
We're getting to the part
I played 30 games in Nords.
But
I came third in the shop league with Nords. And for Nords, that's like a 10 out of 10. I'm number one. Like I'm ready to crack champagne and pour it all over myself.
Yeah, but you didn't win a Adepticon, so like whatever. Nords did, just not you. But newcomer friendly, right? We're gonna give it a D. There are better newcomer factions out there. They're a star.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And when compared against other factions, this is not a good newcomer faction.
It's hard. It's tough.
It is difficult. And what makes it more difficult is that a lot of the rules seem very simple on paper when you look at them, but then in practicality, when faced against what other armies can do and what the actual game is providing with you, it requires you to learn a lot of undercover information. And what I mean by that is you have to understand how to make the proper decisions and moves early on in a game when it's the most risky and could cause you to lose the game the most. So one of the big things with Nords, you have to learn what you can trade for what and what that trade value is worth, whether that's points, whether that's slowing up a unit, whether like what plays can you make that are going to give you the most beneficial move, like beneficial board state. And then on top of that, making those decisions poorly will not just have you lose a fight or lose a round, it will have you lose a game.
Yeah.
Very early. And so what that means is a lot of your early games at low points, very hard. A lot of your early games at 2K, where you're starting to learn how to actually play the game, is also going to be hard because you're going to lose a lot. You're going to lose a lot of games as Nords before you start winning games as Nords. You can't talk about it any other way than that. And for a new player, that is disheartening. If you're a new person and you just got into this game and you've spent like $400 on an army and you lose your first 15 games, that sucks. And when you go to ask people for help and their answer is, well, you just have to like learn to play the game better, is really what it comes down to, is like get good. But there's no like rule to point at or no like mechanic to point at of like how you're going to get good. It's hard, right? When the answer, like the longer form answer is you have to learn how to play objectives well while also trading up in ways that is risky enough, but not too risky, because then you're going to overextend yourself and you're going to lose positioning and die. Those are all bigger brain concepts. This is all like cagey play moves that like if your objective in this game was to eat crayons and hit people with Ugars, it's a little bit harder, right?
Yeah. I would say, like, a good example is, like, one, you have to know, like, when I square up across an enemy opponent, right, and I'm playing Nords, I have to know, one, the approximate value of every one of their units and how many points they've sunk into it. That's number one. You can get that from an app, but you need to just kind of understand it intuitively. so that you can understand where their hinge points might be in terms of points. That, like, you know, oh, if I get that unit, that's like 300 points off the board because they stuck a bunch of upgrades and character into it. Or, secondarily, you need to understand the weighted value of every one of the enemy's units in their strategy. Not just in points, but in their strategy. Because maybe something is kind of cheap points-wise. Maybe it's like a 250 point hero unit that's really not all that points of big. However, you need to know that that hero is the one that's going to give all of their buffs for their army stuff. Okay, now I need to go away from my math decisions because I understand game stance-wise, that one needs to die.
And where I think a lot of these skills are important in every faction. Every faction. This faction, it is going to be the thing that allows you to win or lose games more than in most other factions. Like, this is reason why we say it's bad for newcomers. But like, if you've played another faction and started with another faction and Nords is your second faction, you're going to find this much, much easier to get into. And if anything, it's going to feel better and feel more rewarding as a second faction than it would as a single first faction.
Yeah.
Like, for me, I started with Wadroon, and I played a bunch of games with Wadroon, and then I started looking at other armies. And I didn't start a Nords army because I'm like, I play Nords all the time against Joe. But I looked at the rules, and they were very fun and engaging because I've already learned the game. I've already learned how to play it, and I looked at it. I was like, oh, wow, that's sick. And you'll see this in like the Discord too, where there's lots of people who are like, oh yeah, Nords are awesome. It's the second faction they played. They understand how the game works. They understand like how a board state looks. They can envision it in their mind's eye, and because of that, they have the knowledge to understand how this is awesome.
Where they need to, what units I need to dogpile? Where do I need to position for like a double up charge? Where do I need to bait? Where do I need to just block and know I can't win it? Like, you need all of that info. And for me, I felt it in the opposite direction because I started with Nords having no idea that this was going to be so much learning that needed to be done game state wise to start my first army. But then recently I started my second army, Dwegum. And I've played, 5-ish Dwegum games now. I haven't needed to learn nearly any of this at even close to the level I had to understand for Nords to get to like a 50% win rate. It really is walk up the board and then like, I need to understand some basic target priority for where to shoot and throw spells at.
And that's
but not all of this.
Yeah. And that's difficult when you are also still trying to learn like the rules of the game, because you're going to make some determinations on your army early on of like what it's good at and what it's bad at, because you are learning the rules and learning this at the same time. And then those things are going to be challenged again and again and again and again and again, and you're not going to have answers. I'm not saying if you're a new person who's super into this, you shouldn't play it, but I'm going to say that if you're a new person who wants to play Nords because you love the flavor, you think the lore's sick, the models are cool, I agree with you. That ice Jotnar is awesome.
Oh, it was one of my favorite things I've painted. Yeah. I'll put a picture up. I'm pretty proud of the Jotnar paint job.
Know what you're getting into and go for it, right? Like, have the knowledge that you need in order to address this appropriately. And don't get frustrated when you lose games. Use them as opportunity to learn how to play. Because we're going to our third tenet, and that is long-term mastery. This is where it all pays off.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. Now we're coming back.
So it's A+ here, right? We're giving them an A+. Big ups. Not quite S tier. Not quite perfect. But it is great, right? This right here is the reason you play Nords in its current iteration. Is that once you understand how the game works, and you understand how the faction works, and you understand how to make the trades right, and you understand how to do all this, you become an army that can respond to almost every other army, even your counters. Even armies that are like, oh yeah, they counter you. They don't. You can still beat them. You beat them early on.
It's a little uphill, sure, but you've got the game state to know, okay, I can push them.
Yeah, you can always pull a victory from the jaws of defeat. You can keep a game going for way longer than you think you could, and there's always like a scrap to be won. Truly, like what I played against Joe from our first game all the way to his current mastery, and the difference in his ability to sort of pull a game that he is losing back just because he has mastered and knows how all of it works and how to make plays in turn 2. that are going to pay off in turn 4 and 5 is great. And you can do that with Nords because it has the tools, it has the ability, it's got all the stuff that you need to pull off the super cool technical plays. Gotta learn how to actually use that, right? Like, it's like complex tools, but once you know how to use those complex tools, it's very rewarding.
Yeah. I think for me, the sort of example I would use for this is that, like, it was one of my last Nord games I've played. We were playing our buddy Nick, friend of the show, great opponent we met at the shop, and he was playing his Dwegum list, and I'm going to quote him: "The list was degenerate." I mean, it was. We're pretty sure it's not supposed to work the way that it does, but it does work the way it does. Where for every time he spends a token, he gets to heal a thing, which gives him like double efficiency. Like he saves the thing, he also heals a wound, and depending on the amount of stuff he had, he healed over 30 wounds in addition to blocking a ton of tokens. He was nutty. But the matchup looked bad for me, right? Because I was playing what I play is my Nord list, my fun, fluffy, call the hunt list. I refuse to run the tournament stuff. I don't want to run the tournament stuff. I like what I like. I painted it all. It's pretty. I'm going to put it on the table, and we're going to try to give our friend a game. You know, we know going in, it's going to be a tough one, but let's give it a good go. And it was Dwaggle. It's a hard matchup for Nords in general, in my opinion. But despite him having a much more tuned list, far more efficient synergies, and in a matchup that is not in my favor, just on base factions in most cases, I pushed Nick to round 10. All the way to round 10. All the way to round 10, despite being a bad late game faction. Because of the matchups, because of like the way I dogpiled his units, because of the way I was able to use terrain and ignore it in a way that he couldn't, because of the way I was able to push objectives and die on them, and to keep some of that priority even when he should be ahead, because I just understand his hinge points and how to try to break them. And in the end, we perfectly tied. We did all the math. We double-checked it. It's a perfect tie. A uber competitive, streamlined, nutso, degenerate list, as he put it, versus my fun Nords list, with enough experience, pushed it to a draw. And I'm going to be honest, I don't like to quote dice, but to quote how close this was, in the last attack of the last round, I charged one of his sorcerers. He should have died by an incredible margin. And then he just rolled incredibly well, and if he failed a single dice save, one more dice, the sorcerer would dead, I would have got a bunch of extra points, and I would have won. I mean, one failed dice on the last attack pool. That's how close we were. So there is gas in this tank if you're willing to work at it. It's just, you know, that was my almost 30th game. So there was a whole lot of games that went way worse than that first. And if you're a person who's willing to do that, wow, you can go from being, you know, garbage, as some people say, to an absolute menace.
You can become...
Just gonna take time.
You can become your meta's boogeyman if you take enough time to truly learn it and do it, if that's what you're looking for. But that's our thoughts on like Nords, how to play them, if this is what you're looking for, if this is not what you're looking for. If you're a Nords player and this helped you, put it in the comments. If you're a Nords player and you think we're full of shit and you've got stuff to say to us, tell us.
I would love that too. I also enjoyed Nords chat.
If you are not a Nords player and you are another faction and you're trying to understand how the army works, here you go. If you're completely new to Conquest, please look out our other videos. We've got lore videos. We've got a bunch of other Conquest stuff. And truly, even if you just want to say that like my receding hairline is very visible and that I'm a weirdo, like feel free, throw it on there. If you want to make fun of Joe's like Chainsaw Man hat, go for it.
Who would make fun of Pochita?
But like, otherwise, if you're subscribed, if you're not subscribed, please subscribe, like the video, share it with your friends, show it. Go look at other stuff for Conquest. We love this game. If you're watching this, you probably love this game.
And more will be coming soon. We're working on it.
Yes.
It's in the background. And those boxers, the faction starter box videos, also in the works.
Yes. Yep. Conquest is sort of the big thing we're going to be pushing on top of like some other stuff. But Conquest is sort of our primary topic on the show for a little bit. It's very rewarding. You guys seem to really like it. The game's really fun, and to be honest, there's just not a lot out there for it. And we want to see more people play this game. Our own local group went from like 4 dudes to like 20 over the course of the last 6 months.
I don't know if we're quite at 20, but I think we are for like 15 plus. It's
we're getting more and more every like couple of weeks. So.
It's just cool. I love it. So we'll be working on it, and if you want that, stay tuned. For now, that's been all of our opinions, bona fide, and Kentucky Fried. We'll see y'all in the next episode.